Once you've identified your core processes, you've identified the owners who are going to take accountability for those processes, and you've identified the subject matter experts who know how those processes actually happen, it's time to process map them. A process map is a visual documentation of how a process happens. So it's a diagram flow of how a process happens so that you can accurately understand what's going on in that process. So the way that you do that is going to be by meeting with and observing the subject matter expert who actually does the process. You need to be able to ask good questions to really clarify things as you're going through the process map. And you'll need an application in which to build the process map. So let's start there. There are 3 primary options that I'm going to recommend. The most common, and what I'm showing you on the screen right now that I'm going to walk you through with our template, is Microsoft Visio. Really common in Microsoft shops. Good solution, is probably the oldest one that's used for process mapping and diagramming, right? A couple of newer solutions that are fully cloud-based, Miro and Lucidchart. Both of those are great options. They're going to be cheaper than Microsoft Visio. They may not have the desktop application that Microsoft Visio does, but they're really well for collaborating, especially if you're collaborating with people outside of your organization. All 3 of those solutions will work just fine from a process mapping perspective, though. So just look at each of them and kind of decide what your preference is, but they're all great functionally. So once you have the solution that you're going to use to process map, you need to understand a few basic things about process mapping. So first, you have to spend time with the person who actually does the process to get it right, because your goal is not to capture what leadership thinks happens or what managers think happen. It's to capture what actually happens with that process. And you would be shocked at how often a manager or director thinks that one thing happens, and then when you see the person who actually does the process and how they do it, something different is actually how that process is done, but only the subject matter expert knows that. That's why it's important to meet and observe with the subject matter expert and ask pointed questions with them. Now, I'm going to run through our process map template to give you a few pointers on how you can successfully create a process map itself when you're doing this. So first of all, I always like to use a title page, right? Like obviously make it look what would be appropriate for your organization, your logo up here, title, name the title based on the process, author, revision date. You want to keep proper change control on this documentation. I always like to put a summary. So in the summary, you want to describe at a high level what this process is. You want to define any terms that need to be defined in the process map. Acronyms are really common, right? So make sure that you define those so that the goal of a process map is that anyone who doesn't have a basic knowledge of this process itself, but understands your business, could look at this process and understand what's going on. So make sure that you define any terms that need to be defined. And then detail level, what level of granularity have you documented this process with? If you aren't familiar with process map levels, we have a YouTube video on our YouTube channel that walks you through different process map levels. You can go check that out, and that'll help you kind of understand the different levels of granularity that you can have in a process map. Now, the map itself, if I zoom in a little bit, what you see in front of you is what is called a cross-functional process map. And so the idea here is that when you have a process that travels through different functional areas, departments, teams, individuals, you use these swim lanes, which are these rows that are going across the process map to document how the process transitions across individuals. Depending on your level of granularity, the swim lane could represent departments, or they could represent individual positions inside of an organization. Now, just a note to remember, never use people's names in process map, use their titles, right? Like people change over time, but capture who, as in what job position actually has responsibility for this. So a couple of basic things. You can see that this is just a visual flow of what's happening in the process. I don't have an actual process documented here because this is just a template that you can use, but it's a visual flow that walks you through what is actually happening from a process perspective. This symbol right here, this little oval symbol that you see right here and right here, universally in process mapping, that symbol indicates the start and end of a process. That symbol should only be used at the start and end of a process. So if you see that symbol, you know that's where the process starts or that's where it ends. We use the green and the red to highlight which one is the start and which one is the end. That's kind of a personal preference thing, but we like to use color to kind of draw the eye to where you want to look. Then you have a sequential flow of the process. These squares are used for basic process shapes. These little circles can be used if you need to make an on-page connector where you don't want to have too many lines overlapping, so you use that. The diamond shape can be used to make an off-page connector, and this diamond shape indicates a decision point. So many processes are going to split. You're going to have if this, go this way, if this, go this way. You use this diamond symbol right here to indicate that split and indicate how you decide which direction you should go. That's how you can capture the variability in the process. And then we use this little blue icon right here to indicate control points. So this particular section is not to be an all-encompassing process map training. We will have some videos that you can watch if you want a lot more in-depth training on process mapping specifically. But this is just a high-level overview of how you create a process map and what systems you can use. The idea being you need to go sit and ask questions and observe the subject matter experts to create a process map of the core processes that you've defined in your organization, because you can't improve unless you know what's actually happening at the process level. So process mapping is this next step.